All right, so welcome everybody to the first ever episode of the Innovative Builder podcast by J&RS. We're really excited to launch this thing. We've been talking about it for a while, and we decided it's time to start. It's time to do it. Just go ahead and start it, and we'll see what happens. And so here we are with episode number 1, and I'm here with our owner and founder, Ray Sumberg. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Looking forward to diving in.
Yeah, and just a little bit about why we started this podcast. We are a residential home builder, remodeler here in Duluth, and we've been doing this for about 25 years, and we get a lot of questions from people, obviously, about what it takes to build a home, what it takes to remodel a home. And so we see this podcast really as a way to answer those questions, to have discussions and conversations around those questions. We've got just a wealth of knowledge and experience on staff here, and we're only growing here by the minute, it seems like, adding new team members. And so, we've got in-house designers, builders, professional home construction workers, and we want to tap into that and give people in our community in the building industry some insight into some of that expertise and experience. And so that's why we're here. And before I get into today's topic and subject, I wanted to just give Ray an opportunity to introduce the company a little bit, talk about where we came from, where we are, and where we're going. So Ray, welcome, and why don't you give us a little background on J&RS?
Yeah, thanks, Max. Yeah, we've been doing home building, construction, remodeling since 1994 in Duluth as a company. My brother Jim and myself make up the J&RS. And the whole process started just kind of organically. We were needing work. So what do? You go find work, and the rest is history. Here we are, like Max mentioned, 25 years later, building a lot of remodels yet. That's kind of been our real forte. And as a result of that, we've built a number of new homes through the past couple decades as well.
Got a question. First ever project you ever did, was it a new home, or was it a remodel, or was it what was it?
The first one that I recall that was when we were officially in business together was actually a garage.
Just a garage remodel or a new garage?
Getting a garage kind of fixed up that was in pretty poor repair. And as a result of that project, we did another garage repair in the neighborhood. And a lot of our work was very much that way initially, through word of mouth. And that's how we kind of grew, was people got to know what we could do and trusted us that we would do a good job, which was always our mode of operation. We're going to not leave anyone dissatisfied. And that served us well. We've had a good run of 25 years here.
Oh.
And Jim is nearing retirement. He's a bit older than me. And we're carrying this forward into the next generation. My son Ty is coming on board, buying out Jim's part of the business. So in the next couple of years, there will be that ownership changed out.
A lot of transition happening right now with the company. For those who don't know, and originally the company was called J&R Sumberg Construction Inc.
Yeah.
And we recently changed that to J&RS, which is our parent company. And within that, we've got a few different divisions. We have our build division, J&RS Build, which is primarily our construction, residential construction division. And we have the J&RS Finish division, which is going to represent our new showroom that's opening up here in Duluth, hopefully in the next month or so. Month or two.
By the first of the year, we feel.
Yeah.
Soft opening.
That's exciting.
Yes, it is.
When you were building those first garages, do you ever think we'd be opening a new showroom and kind of get into these different endeavors?
I had no idea, I guess you could say. At the time, I was still thinking I might, go into another line of work even. You know, it was, I was in my 20s.
Just freewheeling.
Yeah, but it was good enough for then.
It's exciting.
And here we are. But
when did you first think, okay, this could be a long-term thing, or this is the real
probably
deal?
when we took on some employees in the early 2000s, like roughly 20 years ago, it got to starting to feel like we were going to commit. You know, we were going to start bringing people in that maybe had families even, you know, and jobs that would support a family.
Right.
So they were younger folks initially, so they weren't necessarily family people, but that crossed my mind at that time that we might end up, you know, growing a little bit from here. Up to that point, it had been about 6 years of Jim and myself. And so we managed to do anything from new home framing, pretty good sized remodel projects. Back then, a really large project would have been like 85 to 100,000, which is now kind of the median project.
So let's get into the topic today. Today, we're going to be answering the question, how much does it cost to build a home? And the reason we decided to tackle this one in episode number 1 is probably because, let's be honest, it's the primary question
Right.
you get when you start talking to somebody about either remodeling their home or maybe potentially building a new home.
Right.
And I think it's probably, a no-brainer that that's going to be a variable kind of answer. But it is an important conversation to have, and it's one you're going to have with every single potential client, potential homeowner, home builder. And so let's talk about that. And I think I just want to start with, we'll kind of go through, we'll get a little bit deeper into the weeds, but I think I just want to start by asking, when somebody comes to you right away and asks about starting a project, and they bring up that question about the cost, and they just want to get an idea of it, what's sort of your summary answer for them right away? What is the first thing you want them to understand about this idea of budget and cost as they're going into it?
The big thing for me is for them to be as educated as possible about the entire budget. What makes up all the parts and pieces of the budget? And building a house is certainly the bigger part of it, but oftentimes people maybe don't keep in their forefront of their mind the fact that there are major price components associated with the land and the development of that land, which might be the utilities. Potentially, if there's special circumstances about the land, will impact the way the house is constructed. So a lot of times, just for them to understand that there's more to it than building the house. And so when they're preparing a budget, they need to not only have their head around the whole concept that a house costs a certain amount to build, but what about all the things that I need to do ahead of time to get it to that point? With the cost of the land comes also the determining the type of house that will go on that land. So sometimes it don't even necessarily pay to talk about the house until you know what the land looks like. Because if you're trying to do a slab on grade, but you're looking for a view property on the side of a hill, and you don't want a basement, you want a slab on grade house, and you want it all one level, those two elements are working in opposite directions. So like a view property is going to be best served with maybe a basement in multiple levels versus a flat site is great for doing a slab on grade house.
And would you say that that land variable is one of the first things you're asking about when somebody comes to you? And
Right.
Some people have their land ready to go.
Yep.
Some people don't. What's more common? What would you say? What place are most people in? At what stage are they in when it comes
looking for land? Yeah.
They're
And
looking
so at
for
that
land,
stage, that's probably the better stage to be at, because then you can really each of them assess what it is that, let's say they're nearing retirement age. Many of our clients are, and they look at the land that they want, and they want to have a very beautiful piece of land, and they want it to have a view maybe. But at the same time, they want the slab on grade house. So we have to definitely help educate them about that piece of land that they might prospectively be looking at to buy, and whether it would be suitable for that slab on grade house, just because of the idea of universal design. You can live in it at any age, whereas the multi-level house is going to be much harder to accommodate somebody that's maybe in declining health at some point, where they would have a little bit of trouble with stairs and multiple levels and things of that nature, and the maintenance of a sloping lot versus maintaining a fairly simple flat lot. So that, and then the utilities can come into a pretty sizable outlay,
Right.
depending on what they are.
And what are with the utilities, what are you kind of looking at when you're, some people are probably going to be pretty set on, I want to be out in the country. Some people want to be in the city, and they're pretty confident in that.
Yep.
But for somebody who's maybe trying to weigh, rural feel versus, inner city or vice versa, what are some things to think about as far as
Well, in
costs?
general, I'll say right up front that if you can hook up to the municipal city water and sewer in just about any jurisdiction, you'll typically be a lot less cost than you will be prepping a rural lot with a private sewer and water system. Private sewer in our area is typically a pressure mound system, and they go anywhere from, I've seen on the low side, maybe 18,000 to upwards of 30,000. And then there's other systems that might be like a hybrid system, and they can even be higher priced than that because of certain soil conditions they have to be instituted. Then compare that to a municipal water and sewer situation. The sewer in a city jurisdiction might cost under $5,000 to hook up to in some scenarios where the tap is already there at the street. With the water, similar costs are incurred in the municipal. Country well in a rural setting could be another 15 to 25,000 is not uncommon.
Wow.
So those costs on the rural side of it are pretty significant, but for some people it's well worth it because you're essentially getting what it is you want,
Right.
in terms of the larger parcel of land with some privacy, potentially some natural views and things like that.
Right. And so some people are probably, like that's well worth the cost for them. That's a great value,
Right.
because it's important for them to have that land. But for some people that might be an eye opener. Like, oh, that dream homestead I was thinking about is,
Yeah. Right.
There's a few more hoops to jump through than.
Yeah. And so these are all things that we're talking about, that costs are incurred before you ever even really have a plan even fully, pulled into shape that, you could even do any pricing on. So that, and the fact that the land itself is on the low side, 35,000 on the low side for a building lot. And that could be in the city, or it could be a small parcel out in the country. And, keep going, 100,000 plus, 200,000 even. I've seen some of the properties go for in really sought after areas, like along the shore of Lake Superior or the shore of a very nice lake. You'll see those kind of costs being pretty standard, to pay 100,000+ for the very nice lakefront property.
Yeah, there's a lot of probably people dreaming about being on the lake.
Yes.
What kind of challenges can be
That
there for that?
is a really major issue sometimes for people, especially where you have erosion going on. We live by the biggest body of fresh water in the world, Lake Superior, but it can be a pretty violent situation when there's a big storm in the November end of the year, typically even into December, lots of high winds and waves that can cause shoreline erosion, and person has to be definitely fully aware of that situation. Some of the areas that aren't necessarily by Lake Superior, but they still have a lot of wind conditions that factor into the design, even as far as putting in the quality of windows and so forth so picking that land has got a lot of nuances. You want to go into it with your eyes wide open.
Does the kind of referencing back to the time of season, if you decide to start building in the middle of winter, can that drive the cost up for construction?
Yes. Snow-covered land is very hard to, say, assess well, especially if you're going to have a private septic system, because they can't even do some of the soil testing that they should really be doing ahead of time because the ground's frozen. So in terms of determining the quality of the land, there's no doubt, just because of topography and stuff like that, you're going to see that whether it's winter or summer or anything in between. But the key there is that you would know whether it has these soil conditions or wetness, high water table, which we don't typically have a problem with. If there are wetlands on it, how does that impact the ability to get to your building site? It's pretty rare in the city that you would build on a lot with municipal utilities that could really impact this much at all, because you're going to not buy a piece of wetlands in the city to build on. It's going to be real obvious. But in a rural setting, when you're talking 5 or more acres even, and the spot you want to build on is maybe 500 to 700 feet back from the road, you could very well be faced with crossing a wetlands. So you'd want to know ahead of time, what are the implications of that?
Right.
Meaning, can I even do it? Is there jurisdiction that says, or local government unit that says, what is going to be the protocol to be able to cross that wetlands, and if it's even allowable. So those are definitely big factors too. And then the engineering that can go into the soils work. One wants to be really aware of the soil type. The best soil types to build on are going to be, your denser, heavier type materials that aren't soft, and like organic materials, typically soft and has to be moved aside and replaced with sand or gravel to build on. Some soil conditions like clay can be built right on top of, just with minimal buffering of rock or sand. Ledge rock is another common thing that we run into. So with ledge rock, you can build on it, but there are certain engineering principles that have to be adopted to be able to meet the code requirements.
Right.
That now coupled with permitting and code, like I just mentioned, are factors too that can affect price. So typically, if you haven't done any planning in the prior fall and placed your sand, let's say for a slab on grade house, which we do on a pretty regular basis, and we blanket it after we've prepped it and compacted it, and then we can let the snow fall on it and then get an early start in the following year, typically February or March. And often we've done that. The house we're sitting in right now is a model home that we did that in, and that worked out really well to have that sand prep done and in, covered with insulation blankets and tarps by Christmas, before it had a chance to freeze in that prior year. So then we were able to actually, with that prior planning, get underway in the winter months, which is actually a little bit of a slower time for us, which works well with our crews. And then the model home schedule, like with the parade, which was canceled this year due to COVID, but typically we would be in by May with the model home done. And so that's worked well. So, but there are higher costs in that there might be some frost in the ground that needs to be essentially heated and melted out of there.
And then the other thing you mentioned, I think briefly, was the driveway, depending on where you have to get to.
Yes, the driveway is not a small factor either.
Yeah.
In some cases, I should say. The driveway where we're sitting here is literally 50 feet long, It's not a major factor at all.
Mm-hmm.
But in a similar rural setting, like this house sets kind of in the woods, you could say, even though it's in a city, a lot of times when people are on a rural site, they want to get back from the road a ways just to kind of minimize that, I'll say, fishbowl effect, like
Mm-hmm.
have that ability to be more private, but yet kind of control your own, what you're looking at and what your view is like.
Mm-hmm.
So you take a 500-foot long driveway, you got something to say is for sure giving you the privacy, but the cost
Right.
is pretty significant, especially if you look at improving it to like paved driveway or something like that
Right.
down the road.
Can you give sort of an estimate of where that can fall in the range as far as a 50-foot driveway versus a road that you're going to essentially have to build to get to your
Yeah,
house?
it's kind of like those dollars per square foot factor
Mm-hmm.
that come into play. And obviously, the more driveway you do, and if the conditions are good, and you're only putting a foot of gravel down because it's pretty good solid substrate, that you're putting it on. Maybe it's pretty hard clay in a well drained area, or it's pretty rocky soil
Mm-hmm.
and not like full of organic, softer material again, like I mentioned before. You could be in that $12 to $18 per running foot of 12-foot wide driveway, so
Mm-hmm.
$1 to $1.50 a square foot.
Mm-hmm.
And that's on the low side. That's if things are just perfect.
Right.
And then if you got to fill in a low area with bigger rock and stuff, you could easily double that number quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And that's based on, pretty good volume of like a 100-foot driveway or longer.
Right.
It usually gets higher on the smaller installation because there's a certain amount of construction that just has to happen, the mobilization of the equipment,
Mm-hmm.
the hauling of the gravel and so forth,
Right.
that is
Mm-hmm.
going to apply regardless of what size you go.
Yeah. So land right there. We haven't even gotten to the house yet.
Mhm.
We're looking at, that we could be at $150,000, $200,000 before you even start to build the home,
Right.
depending on your land situation. If you're in the city, if you're outside the city, clearly, if you're thinking about most efficient, cost-effective ways, probably building in the city, would you generally say is going to be less expensive?
Pay
versus
more
building
for
in
the
country.
lot,
Mm-hmm.
but that's all subjective too, because you can find, a view lot versus a not a view lot. They're not in the same category for price.
Right.
But you can get a city lot for 50 to 60,000 pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
Very buildable lot. You could get that 5-acre parcel in the country for the same price, 50 to 60,000,
Mm-hmm.
maybe,
Right.
depending on a lot of factors.
Mm-hmm.
But then it gets into the utility costs pretty
Right.
quickly,
Right.
where the price changes. The private sewer and well are going to be
Mm-hmm.
the big cost drivers.
So let's move on to the foundation element. Okay, so you got your land, you've got that area covered. This next part of the cost of building a home, the foundation.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk a little bit about that and how that can affect the overall budget or the cost.
So a big factor on foundation is the actual soil condition
Mm-hmm.
that you're on. So my assumption is always going to be that I'm not going to build on soft organic material because I could have major problems, and no structural engineer would ever stand behind a design that put us on soft, wet soils that are unstable.
Mm-hmm.
So my presumption is if it's not stable, we make it stable. So then you have the type of foundation as being the next driver, which is generally speaking, more and more instances we're seeing slab on grade houses, and those are heated slabs. And it's just for the ease of construction, therefore a lower cost, better price point, that people are definitely trending more to the slab on grade than what you'll see traditionally was dominated in our area by basements.
Mm-hmm.
I think people got a lot of dual purpose use out of basements in the form of kind of that root cellar, safe place, safe
Right.
storm shelter type of mentality.
Yeah, see,
Just
that's
kind of an old school thought that it would be great.
I always felt like you had to have a basement. Like it's kind of a misconception I had. Is like in Minnesota, I was like, oh yeah, of course you have a basement. But then
Right.
I learned, oh, and a lot of people don't do basements anymore.
Right.
Totally fine.
And a lot of that came down to frost, because the frost code has been for years like 5 feet below grade is the depth of frost in certain areas that where the ground gets pounded in the winter, and it actually makes the frost go deeper. So that was part of the conception of how you like game it so that you're not going to have a problem with frost heaves in your foundation. But I am definitely all about basements in the right application, especially when you can do a walkout, because you can make it feel just like great living space. And the most efficient way to construct is to stack up boxes in terms of getting the best bang for your buck, volume wise. Interior conditioned living space. You're building one foundation and you're reusing it potentially 3 times over. You know, the basement itself, living space, the floor above it, living space, the floor above that, living space. You know, you're talking 2-story buildings all the time above grade with a layer below grade, of which half of it might be exposed to a nice walkout scenario where it's a nice dry basement, and you can put a lot of windows on that walkout wall and so forth. So,
Right.
yeah, there's definitely the topography of the site has a lot to do with why you would or wouldn't do a basement.
Now, say somebody has sort of, the option. Which one, what kind of basement or what kind of foundation are you going to do? You could do either or. What are your suggestions, or what are your sort of variables looking at to determine?
I look at, first off, what is their life situation? Do they plan to live in that house between now and, they don't ever plan to leave until they absolutely need to? And if that's the case, maybe they want to consider having a slab on grade house, because then they don't have to worry about mobility issues and stairways. Though houses with basements can have an elevator put in, but you're talking about a totally different price point. We're in the process of building one right now with an elevator set up for it to be added. We've done several houses with elevators over the course of the last 20 years. And residential elevators are really not that big of a deal, but they typically are another $40,000+ cost to add.
Right.
To do like a 3-stop elevator. So that'd be basement, main floor, second floor. Stops, 3 times to accommodate the entire house. So foundation-wise, we do a lot of ICFs with basements, which is insulated concrete forms, and that is a poured concrete wall, which is extremely effective, both for providing that level of insulation to protect it from frost, and actually also is a very great insulator. Concrete poured inside a foam is a great insulator, so it's usually 8 inches thick. So those types of blocks stack up with rebar put in as it's being built over the top of a footing, and that's poured with concrete in place, and the forms stay when you're done. And those are very effective means of gaining the basement walls, which are very strong too and resist any frost or adverse conditions that we have in northern Minnesota. The other one that we use with the slab on grade is a foam monoform, easy form, which is a triangular shaped cross section, and that actually stacks all the way around the perimeter to a height of about 18 inches. And it has the triangular shape, and it provides that what they call wing insulation out around the perimeter to protect from frost getting underneath. So these are at shallow draft. They're only 12 to 18 inches below the existing ground, and that foam that's utilized with this and placed and leveled and backfilled all around the entire perimeter keeps the frost from damaging the foundation. So that's called a thickened edge monoslab, and that's when we also embed tubing pretty often for the heating system. That's what the house we're in right now is, a thickened edge slab done with one pour. So it doesn't take the several steps that a traditional basement would, which is a footing, a foundation wall, and the slab, all 3 separate pours.
Yeah, and by the way, I forgot to mention that where the house we're sitting in right now is like Ray mentioned, a model home built by J&RS, and all the modern efficiencies and some modern materials that you could want. It's about a 2,400 square foot house, including the huge attached garage. And I'm going to put the specs and the features and the different variables of this home in a blog post attached to this video, and you guys can take a look at that and see what the final cost came out of this home. And we'll put a couple of other examples of homes we've built as well, just to give a general idea of what you can do for how much. So moving on, what would you say is the next thing then from the foundation? What's the next variable?
The variables that I think are really relevant, that are price factors, like really you should be conscious of, are the simplicity of design. Like the simplest box to build has 4 corners, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you put in a lot of corners and angular geometries within the building construct, you will drive the cost of the construction up substantially.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's always been our goal to keep design simplistic, because at the end of the day, it does come down to how much money do I want to spend on my house? Do I want to be cash poor because I have such a high house payment for all the bells and whistles and so forth?
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, if you want to get to that level with a nice kind of intermediate approach to it, we can certainly add features. We don't have to be locked into this simple box from front to back.
Mm-hmm.
It can have, say, a vaulted ceiling, or it can have maybe a little higher ceiling in the great room area. I think a case in point would be like our Knife River home, model home from last year. And that has a very high great room ceiling. And then the back part of that is a 2-story. It's on our website as well. And I think there's drone footage coming up on it. It's fairly boxy looking, but it's really like a big wow factor when you stand inside of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you get a sense that there's a lot of space and openness and volume here,
right,
that gives it a real pleasant appearance. And then that and a large window wall,
mm-hmm.
a very efficient windows. And then it's situated on a nice rural piece. So,
Mm-hmm.
That again has a lot to make one think this is really a good design.
Right.
Simple, but yet effective.
Right. And that kind of seems to, attest to the more modern aesthetic of J&RS. Mm-hmm. We tend to, I say if we had a style, it'd be the more modern, simple lines, sleek, kind of minimal, which I think is great. A lot of people seem to love. So that not only looks good, but it keeps the cost down too, right, essentially.
And there's another factor that comes into the design, and it's getting to be less and less as a percentage of the whole, but the energy efficiency. Because our code drives us toward very energy efficient homes already, it just costs more to build in northern Minnesota than it does, say, down in Kansas or Texas or, in the Midwest. But, typically your costs are driven, a lot by the energy efficiency of the home.
Mm-hmm.
But if you go from 2x6 wall with foam around the exterior versus a super insulated double wall house, it doesn't necessarily add tens and tens of thousands of dollars to upgrade the energy
mm-hmm.
efficiency. It might be, surprisingly to people, on the order of $10,000 to $12,000 on kind of a basic house of this size that we're in right now,
mm-hmm.
to get like the R value up, by 20% all the way around,
right,
which can be a significant savings in the long run, but it is a longer payback. So energy is maybe less of an issue than it was. I go back to the simplistic design, the geometry not having too much complexity,
mm-hmm.
and then we land at the finishes. What finishes do you put into it? So medium finishes put in at a great level of workmanship work for a lot of people.
Yep.
They don't necessarily have to have the top of the line, fully custom furniture grade kitchen cabinetry,
Mm-hmm.
ornate type of patterns or features or tons of crown molding. But if you do, that's fine as well. We can fully customize the house,
Mm-hmm.
because each project we do is custom. The cabinets themselves are a big factor. Appliances of various grades are a big factor as well.
Right. And what in regards to the design, kind of going back a step here, what can you speak to what approach most people usually take when they come to work with J&RS? Do they have all the plans written up and they're ready to go? Is that something that you're typically working with them on? I know we have designers in house, and we've designed a lot of houses without architects. But if somebody has an architect they want to work with, or they've got plans already, can they bring those to you?
Right.
And how does that affect the cost? Because that's
Right.
obviously not it's not free to draw up designs for the house. So how does that play in?
Well, I've heard people say that their architect plans that they've come to us with, maybe cost them 3 to 5% of their projected project cost. I've seen more than that too, over 5%, but that's not an uncommon range to be at.
Mm-hmm.
Architects probably don't really often publicly say what their fee is because it has a lot to do with what it is the client is asking of them.
Right.
They want to know, how much detail do you truly want? Do you want me to draw out every elevation of every room with all the trim details, or are you satisfied with kind of your pretty basic kitchen and bath layouts? Do some 3D modeling, that can keep that cost in that 3 to 5% range potentially.
Mm-hmm.
We are a design build company, and we're typically 1 to 3% of the cost of construction.
Mm-hmm.
And we aren't an architect service. We provide the plans that we feel are hitting the budget goal that the client has laid out.
Right.
And it's an iterative process to get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll have that, on the website available as well to see what those costs are real specifically.
Mm-hmm.
But that architectural process is extremely important, whether it be design build or done by a professional architect, because without a good set of plans, you can't price a project correctly either. And you have to send it out to subcontractors for them to be able to, like the plumbing and the electrical and the heating, they have to know what the building is like in order to give you a meaningful price. And it can't just be done with a quick sketch and here's what it is.
Right.
And I'm going to hold you to those numbers.
And I'm glad you mentioned the iterative process. It's because I'm wondering, for somebody who's kind of going to the home building project, I mean, this could be something that takes,
Weeks.
weeks, but also the length of the project could be, from when they started thinking about it, or even when they started having the conversation, they had this budget in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, a lot of times that's going to either fall above or below that line generally.
I haven't seen it below, but yeah.
most times it goes up as they go.
Well, a lot of times they might not have good information on the front end.
Mm-hmm.
So typical budgets that they might have had discussion with somebody might only encompass the home construction of the actual build of the house.
Mm-hmm.
And there hasn't been the factoring in of the land acquisition, the driveway, the utilities, engineering, potentially the architectural fees,
Right.
permitting, which is whatever the local government unit says
Right.
you have to have. Those all, like you mentioned before, 100 to 150,000 is not an uncommon amount of money to spend before you've ever broke ground and actually started the house.
Right. But along with that, oftentimes those budgets probably come out over because of misinformation or just a lack of education on the front end. But are you working with them as far as on how they can be, working within that budget? It's not always about cutting costs, but if there's a way to cut costs, is that something you're working with them? And what are some of the ways that you think most people can look for to cut costs or to keep those costs at a more efficient range for their budget?
Well, a lot of times it comes down to, did they ahead of time already buy the land and they paid for it? And so that's like not even in the equation.
Mm-hmm.
Have they already pushed a driveway back on that rural site and it's there to use, and they've paid for that ahead of time out of pocket? Some of the, I would say, people closer to retirement age and stuff like that are often at that stage, and they're just literally looking for the cost of construction of the home
Mm-hmm.
to build. And you had talked about that time element. If someone's looking to build next spring of 2021, for instance, they should be working pretty hard right now on land acquisition, design concepts, and getting that first look at it, kind of that plus minus 10% that we,
Mm-hmm.
often advertise as that gut check to see where the budget could end up on the project
Right.
well in advance, so that it affects the final design.
Mm-hmm.
Get the design where you want it to be.
And I guess kind of moving towards the conclusion, looking at the finishes and interior, design of the house. Let's talk a little bit about some of the variables there, more specifically. What are some of the biggest costs going to be there, as far as things like flooring, cabinets,
Yeah.
and what do you see as sort of variables that determine where that could land?
So what we do when we structure a bid or quote, like in its final form, we're taking it from an allowance that we collectively arrived at with the client prior to like firming up numbers to establish that plus or minus 10% quote. And at that level, we've just assigned some allowances that we think will cover the things according to their taste.
Mm-hmm.
And they might have done a little bit of kitchen shopping or a few fixtures they've priced out that they like. So it gives us a little flavor of where they're headed in terms of their budget.
Mm-hmm.
Appliances can be a huge one, and everybody needs appliances in their new home.
Right.
This doesn't change much from remodeling, but today we're talking about new homes, so we'll stay on task. But with appliances, we see anything from on the low end in a kitchen, $4,000 to $5,000 to upwards of $25,000 to $40,000 for the appliances. So that's a fairly significant factor. Kitchen cabinets are a big factor. Plumbing fixtures, which could be, all manner of things to do with plumbing, kitchen sinks and faucets and
Right.
all the toilets and
the
vanities
cabinets.
and
You mentioned the cabinets. We've got a few line of cabinets.
Right.
You want to talk briefly about just how that process plays out and what kind of what we offer, at least from our.
We cover all the bases with 3 lines of cabinets, we feel like, because we have fully customizable wood cabinets that can be the full access without face frames, or they can be traditional with face frames. We'll get to that in another podcast.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be our top of the line, and that is fully customizable.
Mm-hmm.
And your typical kitchen, like in a house like this, would be in that fully customizable product line, probably $10,000 to $12,000 out, for the cabinets themselves.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the next level from there is a thermally fused laminate cabinet, which is actually the cabinet that we have here behind me, and that's a very good product, very durable, very smudge and dent resistant, and it's very practical. And these are full access every time, so they have, you open the door and it's the full. You don't have a face frame taking up extra space. The doors are close together. Then you have our third line, which is speed to market, all birch wood construction, semi-customizable cabinet. And that cabinet is extremely popular in that it's at a great price point. It's all birch construction, birch plywood, doors and drawers.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all, kind of a range of where you can land. Then we have access, of course, to quality countertops through some of our partners that we'll definitely be able to showcase really well in our new showroom,
Mm-hmm.
which will be opening. But anything from your Formica high definition, up to the natural stone products that can, be pretty amazing in of themselves. And then in the middle is kind of the Corian, and then step up a little bit to quartz, and then we also will be selling Cambria and
Right.
the higher end.
So every material and finish
Right.
seems to have kind of its
Yeah.
Medium to high price point.
Right.
That you're gonna have some options there depending on how you want to go. But
Yeah.
so it kind of seems like there's a range within each one of those that people can sort of find what fits
Right.
best. Mm-hmm.
So even our any basic house that you look at, complete turnkey in this day and age, seems to be coming out north of 300,000, even if it's a very small house.
Mm-hmm.
And in general, there's to have a home built, there's the cost of the materials, there's the cost of the labor, and the cost of the, we'll say, subcontractors that are the specialized trades like plumbers, electricians, and so forth. So not far off from that third mentality either, really, as far as what makes up the total. And when I say materials, that could be anything from the concrete for the foundation to the nails for the framing, trusses for the roof, to the cabinets and flooring. So as the budget increases to a bigger house and a higher number, it still tends to kind of fall into that third category.
Right.
So that's just a generalization, definitely, because we've seen some scenarios where the finishes were making up more like a half. Like the materials and all the finishes were making up a half, and it was like 25 or a quarter, 25% or a quarter of what's left was labor, and similarly on subcontractors, just because the house was far more involved with higher end finishes.
Mm-hmm. And we've been talking here mostly about sort of finishes and things inside of the house. One thing we haven't mentioned is any sort of uninhabited spaces.
Right.
That could be additions to some of these things that are more the nice to haves and whatnot. Do you want to speak a little bit about where those come into the factor? Obviously, it's kind of, you can go as big as you want. You want to 10 pools in your backyard, whatever.
More likely will be like a small pool versus a lap pool versus a full blown large in ground pool. We don't see that much in our climate, just due to the fact that our climate is what it is. But we see a lot of patios, and we do a lot of stamp stained concrete. That can be a really nice feature. Could be, a $10,000 adder to have a large patio in the back. Could be double that if it's a real large patio.
Right.
But a lot of people are doing maybe a couple 100 or 300 square feet of patio, and that's going to be more in that $10,000 to $14,000 range. Sidewalks, them are not free. Everything factors in. Typically with sidewalks, we put an apron on the front of the garage. People pave driveways or not. That's $3 to $3.50 a square foot for pavement. The landscaping, the hardscape that goes into a project could be a fairly significant cost. If you're on a hillside, you might need some retaining wall work. The landscaping itself, the softscape, the planting and so forth. Those are hard to just put a number on. But I think on any project, if you said that there was $20,000 in kind of external work related to sidewalks, patio, maybe it's not a patio, maybe it's a deck in some scenario. That's the low side, 20,000. That's not a paved driveway included or anything like that, but that'll get you potentially a patio, for setting the grill, and having some patio furniture and some sidewalk and some nice stone around the foundation to keep a little bit away from the foundation with the lawn maintenance equipment, planting grass and so forth.
Yeah, it's one of those things that people, when they think about building a house, they might just be wondering what's it cost to get the walls and the roof on, get the walls up, get the roof on. It's these, but there's just so many factors, that I think you might not think about. And so this has been good to kind of go through this kind of a little more high level sort of exhaustive list, and I hope that in this podcast we can kind of dive deeper into some of these areas too, and really get into more of the nooks and crannies of how these affect the construction process and budgeting and whatnot. I guess in conclusion, we're running out of daylight here, so we'll try to wrap it up. What do you want to leave people with as far as thinking about the cost of building a home? Obviously, this can be a little overwhelming for people who really want to be able to build a home or even remodel the current home that they have. It might feel like, is this ever going to be attainable for me?
Right.
Is it kind of a pipe dream? What do you have to say as an encouragement to people as they're thinking about this and thinking about their future home and kind of what their goals might be?
I think a lot of it comes down to where one is in their, life in terms of their current situation. What are their needs in terms of whether you have a family or not? If it's just two people, what can you expect for amount of space you need at this time versus the time in the future when you have different plans, maybe to have a family? Or some people are also looking at the long term, like what are my goals in the future? Do I want to have that rural lot that I could do, like a hobby farm, or have the space that I would require? So just kind of factoring in maybe the long game a little bit right on the front end of your thinking. And then maybe this house I'm living at in town isn't ideal, but it's really getting me to where I want to be because I'm able to save up now. But in the meantime, I live in this house and it has an old kitchen or an old bathroom. Why not bite off a little bit of a project and see,
Right.
what would it take to convert this bathroom from 1950s feel, to upgrade it to something modern and kind of tackle a few projects at a time maybe
Right.
on my existing house to kind of get yourself into a mode of, I kind of enjoy, the whole process and what the end result's like and improves my quality of life.
Right.
Why not go for it?
Yeah.
Or maybe even do your own do-it-yourself deck project or something like that where you feel like you could tackle it so that, you can kind of get a sense how much work it really is, but then also to get your mind accustomed to the idea that it's okay to change, things up,
Right.
rather than be satisfied with exactly like it's been for the last 50 years and I'm not going to really do anything with it until I've got every penny saved up to do exactly what I want. Well, what if you don't get to that point?
Right. Right.
Life changes and
right. You don't know what's coming, and
yeah.
the importance of home is changing too. I mean, we've seen with this pandemic just how that, I think for a lot of people, their idea of what a home looks like and what it can do for them is really changing. And it's obviously every sort of hard situation brings about evolution and adaptation, and so it's kind of exciting to think about too what that could look like in the future, as far as working from home or just having some of those things in your home available.
Yep, that's very much true. Especially many people are working from home, like you mentioned, and they're not able to go and do the things they wanted to, build right into their lifestyle, like maybe the fitness center, maybe it's the office. I go to the office, I get on, mass transit, and I get to my job and I go to my office. Well, anymore, maybe that's not the case.
Right.
So we start looking at our home a little differently. Do I need an addition, or can I repurpose the existing space to get that home office? Can I get that fitness area finished off in my house? Can I make my kitchen nicer because we do a lot more cooking? We're not eating out nearly as much.
Right.
Get that bathroom tuned up because the grout's all falling out of the old tile,
Right.
and on and on. So that's where I think getting your feet wet with a little bit of remodeling can sometimes help, get you in the mode that, hey, let's eventually build what we want on the parcel of land that we want.
Right. Well, that's great. Thanks, Ray. I think we'll wrap up our conversation here. I think that was a really helpful sort of primer for thinking about the cost of building, and hope it was helpful for anybody that's either thinking about building in the immediate future, or even if this is something you're just starting to think about. Hopefully you can kind of start to put together a little bit of a checklist here of maybe what you should start thinking about, even if you're 1, 2, 3 years out. There's a lot you can be doing on the front end right now, like you said, to be thinking about how you can really manage that budget and go into a new build situation equipped and ready to make it a better experience.
Right.
So I want to thank you, Ray, and everybody who joined us today. Thank you for joining in. Please feel free, if you are on YouTube, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Like this video if it gave you some information that was helpful, and make sure you follow us on our Instagram website, and check out jrsduluth.com, where you can see some of the homes we've built recently, some model homes. You can check those out and get a feel for what some of those modern homes look like. And like I said, we'll also be listing some prices for homes that we've built recently, and the features and specs of those, and what the price points are for those homes. So thank you again, Ray.
Yeah,
Appreciate
thank you, Max.
joining us today.
Yeah, it was great.